We've been looking at the book of Exodus on Sunday mornings. The story so far is pretty simple. Up till now, this has been a story of refusal and resistance. Let my people go. God's command to Pharaoh is met by rejection, increase the grim conditions, make promises, break promises, leave the people where they are. But we got to the point of the story where the dam's going to burst today, and Pharaoh's going to say, go, leave, get out. And Israel will do that, probably a couple of million of them, along with large droves of livestock. And you may be sitting in your seat this morning going, hey, what has that got to do with me? So we're going to start by going to the New Testament. So if you've got a Bible, please turn to Luke chapter 24. It's on page 1061. Okay? Luke chapter 24 is Luke's account of the resurrection. Okay? So this is the first Easter day. Jesus is risen from the tomb. He meets a couple of his guys who are heading out of Jerusalem. They don't know who he is. They don't recognize him. Their heads are down. They're depressed. They think the whole thing's falling apart. He starts them talking. Hey, come on, tell me what are you so upset about? And they unpack where they are. And they arrive at their destination, and Jesus then speaks to them. And I want you to look at verses 25 to 27. 25 to 27. He, that's Jesus, said to them. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? Here's the punchline. Listen to this. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on. As if he was going further, they urged him to stay strong. Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. And on it goes like that. Now, this is a real question, okay? I'm going to ask a real question. I want to answer to it. What is surprising about what we just read? What are you supposed to say when you read that? Jesus does this Bible study with them, takes the Old Testament, begins with Moses, explains to them how the Old Testament fits together around him, and we don't get a word of the Bible study. Hey, don't you think that's strange? Don't you read your Bible and go, come on, Luke. I think I might even be prepared to have learned Aramaic to understand Jesus' Bible study, which must have been the best Bible study you'd ever be at in your life, as he teaches us how the Old Testament fits together, beginning with Moses and all the prophets. Now, the answer to the question can't be that Luke doesn't want us to know these things. And of course, when you start to read Luke's Gospel, you start to see there's little glimpses of how Jesus put the story together. So maybe you've read this week, if you've been following the kind of passages, Luke chapter 22, which describes the Passover. Jesus kind of moves the lamb and the bitter herbs and the unleavened bread to the side, kind of pushes it across the table, and he says, it's about me. It's not about a little cuddly animal that had its throat cut back there. No. This Passover thing is about me. And if you just turn back a few pages and look to chapter 9, go back to chapter 9, it's on page 1039. It's called the Transfiguration. Jesus has got three of his pals. He goes up a mountain. His appearance changes. He kind of becomes really bright. His clothes shine. Two men appear. One called Moses. Not worry about the other one, Elijah. Moses chats to Jesus. Now what I want you to do is to see what they talk about. So verse 31, it's just the very last word on the page. They spoke about his departure. And you'll see it's got a little A beside it, and you look down to the bottom of the page, to the footnote, and it says this word means Exodus. Right. Jesus chats to Moses about his Exodus. Jesus is about to conduct the real Exodus. So when you read the Old Testament is a kind of picture book. I would almost call it a comic strip, but not that it's trivial or stupid, but rather that it's a series of pictures that teach us about what it means to know and trust God. We are not interested in 14th century BC Egyptian history. That's not why we're here today. That's not why we've come. We have come here today to discover how to relate to God. And 14th century BC Egyptian history, because it's all about Jesus, helps us to do that. So with that in mind, we're now going to read the little section for today. So please turn to page 69, Exodus chapter 12. It's not too long a section today. And we're going to read down to verse 42. Okay? So it's described as the Exodus. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you've said, and go, and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders, and kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast, because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Now, the length of time the Israelites people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. Because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt, on this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honour the Lord for the generations to come. Today's talk's got two parts to it. Part one, departure. Leaving the life of slavery. So here's Israel, and they've got to leave this world of slave drivers and back-breaking work, this corrupt regime that kills their children. Now, you would have to say, just that's not exactly going to be a difficult thing to do, is it? The freedom that beckoned them was attractive. But the little twist that the gospel puts into this is it shows me that I don't need liberation so much from other people's sins as I need liberation from my own sins. There are unfair systems. People are subject to prejudice. You might have been somebody who has been badly affected by that in the past. But that's not your greatest problem. I read a little book over the Christmas holidays called The Tunnels. In 1960, 61, the Soviet Union or the East German government built a wall across the city of Berlin. So East Berlin, West Berlin, big wall. Divided families, divided love hearts, divided friends. And there were multiple attempts to help people escape from the Soviet side, the communist side, to the free side. And one of the ways that people did it was by means of tunnels. And probably the most famous tunnel was a thing called the Bernauer Tunnel. 400 feet of digging, produced an escape route that was 3 feet square, and 27 people on the 14th of September 1962 made it to the west through this tunnel. Now the book wasn't a Christian book, but it just made this point, describing the aftermath. It said, after a short time though, the first flush of relief had passed. All right, it's great. We're in the free west. Life, though, looked uncertain, with no jobs and no close family on this side of the wall. Unsteady marriages had just grown shakier. Interesting comment. You see, you'd escaped one regime, these Germans, but actually you brought another one with you, which is what we're talking about here. And the regime that they really needed release from was not the communists, it was the power of sin that controlled their lives. Now, it's possible to think of Christianity as just a kind of system. It changes a few ideas in your head. It makes things, makes you think slightly differently. No! Exodus shows you that something objective and real has happened. As surely as slaves have been freed from the authority of their slave drivers and moved into a place of freedom, so if you are a Christian, the slave driver of sin in your life has been broken. Be clear about that. God really has done something. You see, if you imagine an Israelite family and they're kind of looking through the curtains and they're thinking about going. And there's Ahmed. I don't know if that's an Egyptian name, but we'll use his name. Okay, there's Ahmed, their slave driver, standing at the corner. Okay, and he sees them come out of the house and he says, hey, where do you think you're going? Get back to work. You've got bricks to make. And they just walk past him. They ignore him because he has now got no authority over their lives. You and I need to recognize that when we're tempted to lose our temper, work all the hours of the day, love money, view porn, indulge food and drink, you do not have to do those things. The slavery is over. The gospel is about real liberation. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that we are perfectly sinless, but I am saying that the tyranny of sin ends with the gospel. I cannot address my addictive habits with, look mate, it's just the way I'm made. It's just my genes. Just who I am, it's just me. No, it's not, it's just you. If the gospel has got your life, you're a new person. Understand that. Here's the other side of the coin, okay? So, leaving, yeah, we've got to leave, but at the same time, there is another side. There is somewhere we're going. There is a freedom to be enjoyed. So this is not just an escape story. It's not even mainly about sacrificing lambs and cutting through the sea. It's not just about leaving. It has a destination in mind. And you and I need to know where we're going. So number one, at its simplest, the destination is Canaan. But that will never be more than a temporary home. So here's Exodus 19, just a little bit later in the story. This is what God says. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Pharaoh spells it out, doesn't he? Go and worship the Lord. Worship's probably better translated as serve. Hey, go and serve the Lord. Sin makes me self-serving. Slavery to sin means I'll always choose to do what I want. The death of Jesus Christ doesn't just mean I'm no longer a slave to my moods and my habits. It means I can freely choose to serve God. The Lord our God. The Lord our God is the destination. It's where we're headed. See, when you look at Pharaoh for a second, it makes this interesting statement, doesn't it? In verse 32. Take your flocks and your herds, as you've said, and go, and also bless me. Where did that come from? Also bless me. Now, what it does is it just gives you a little insight into the way that Pharaoh thinks. Pharaoh thinks gods are a means to an end. The Nile, the sun. What are these gods there for? They're there to make Egypt prosper. That's what they're there for. They're to make our lives good, better than other people. Gods are a means to an end in Pharaoh's head. Okay. But the Lord is not merely a useful resource. The Lord is not merely a service provider that enables my life to run a little bit more smoothly. God created us to know Him, enjoy Him, live with Him, love Him. Like Israel, if you're a Christian, you've set off on this journey, right? The destination is God Himself. That's the journey that we've set out on. We're not headed, some of this won't mean much to you, but we're not headed for the promised land of retirement. It's not that great, by the way, You know, the place where you've got all your ducks in a row. You don't have to get up early anymore. You can do pretty much what you want all day. You've got a bit of disposable income. Your children are financially independent. Nah. That is not the destination. Here's a man, Paul. He's under house arrest in Rome. He's got a trial before Caesar coming up. There's a high chance he'll be executed. He's not gloomy or bitter. He's not resentful. He knows where he's going. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Woo! We're going to God. It is a strange thing, isn't it? To think that you'll be happy sharing the life of God in heaven if you've not started to do that now. Those who know where they're going will invest in the life of prayer, Scripture, love, praise, because those are the places we get to know our God. Freedom to serve God. Freedom to follow His timetable. Another little point that Exodus makes for us. It's easy, isn't it, to reduce worship to what we do in this room on a Sunday. Israel will set out from Egypt and they'll make their way 3 months later to this mountain called Sinai, and God will give them His law. And that law will cover absolutely every area of their lives. Now, at ground level, this is a kind of picture of urgency and movement, isn't it? You know, this is lastminute.com you're looking at here. It happens on this one momentous night. They don't have time to make the sandwiches. And anyway, they're thinking to themselves, is Pharaoh going to change his mind? They don't know. But if you view this from a different angle, look at verses 40 and 41. Okay, here's a different take on this. At ground level, it's all kind of panic and packing and let's go and have you got the bread? No. Look at what happened. Look at what it's saying in verses 40 and 41. This is a different take on it, isn't it? Now, the length of time the Israelites people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. 430 years to the very day. From the moment the words were spoken to Abraham, 4 centuries earlier, Genesis 15, go read it for yourself later, there was a day marked in God's calendar. Big asterisk. That's the day. And there's great reassurance in that, isn't there? History is not subject to the whims of the Chinese premier or the American president. It's not even subject to climate change or the coronavirus. No. History is subject to the rule of our God. He puts it in his diary. This is what's going to happen in 430 years. I don't have a diary that lasts for 430 years. I'm going to be doing this on this day. No. It's ordered down to the most minute detail. Now that's a great encouragement, but there's also a challenge in this, of course, isn't there? 430 years is a long time. And there's going to be lots of passages of that where not much is seen to be happening. Some of these guys will just have lived through slavery for a significant length of time. So God operates on grand scales, but we operate on minute scales. There'll be long periods when nothing much is happening, when God's people are being required to patiently wait. But the law of God shows me how to walk in step with God during these long periods of time. So you go to the law, and the law says 6 days you'll work, you'll labour, and 1 day you'll rest. That's God's timetable. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. 6 work, 1 rest. Now work might be caring for small children, might be homemaking, might be voluntary work, might be paid employment. Rest, well, that involves doing things like this, coming together on a Sunday, serving others, laying aside normal routines and anticipating the ultimate rest of God's presence. I guess some of us need to work out the work thing, that it's not all consuming, that there's enough of it, and some of us need to work out the rest thing, so that we protect, we put boundaries around the opportunity for doing what we're doing today and serving others and doing those things. We are not waiting on our lives to start, to meet Mr. Right or Miss Right, to have a child, to find a job, to move to a better house. We're not waiting on those things. We're serving God in the mundane and the everyday, in the sure knowledge that God has got an even bigger asterisk on his calendar, the return of Jesus Christ and the move into the rest of his presence. They're heading to serve God. They're learning to operate by his calendar. Third thing, there's room for others. They're learning to welcome others. So verse 38, have a look at it. Many other people went up with them. And then verses 40, 44 and 48 refer to slaves and foreigners who are welcome at the Passover meal. Now, no doubt those who went with them had mixed motives. This is just a kind of, well, there might be something at the end of this. No doubt there was much confusion in the minds of those who went. I think we touched on this last week, didn't we? Exodus is the story of God revealing himself, and God reveals himself to Moses as the Lord. But who's the Lord? Exodus raises questions about God's power. He slaughters the firstborn. He sends plagues. He hardens Pharaoh's heart. Is the God of Exodus unpredictable and uncaring? Is the God of Exodus just another version of Allah? Hey, what's he going to do next? Exodus chapter 3, God reveals himself to Moses as I am ... Now, what word fits in to that space? I'm going to suggest, well, really two words. He is the God of faithful love. Let me explain why I think you can say that about God. Back in chapter 6, he makes this statement about himself. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and mighty acts of judgment. I'll bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham. Now here's the thing, just pay attention to this carefully. God's power is controlled by God's promises. God's power is exercised, it's poured out, it's conducted according to certain promises that God has made. These are called covenant promises. He's there in Egypt liberating his people because 4 centuries before he made promises to their ancestor Abraham. He's not just kind of, all I do today, I'll go liberate these people. No. He's keeping his promise to Abraham. He's faithfully keeping his promises to bless these people. And the story of the Old Testament is the story of outstanding faithfulness. These people are a nightmare. This is a soap opera of a family. And God is outstandingly kind to them. Utterly faithful, keeping his promises. When Jesus Christ arrives on the scene, John says, we saw his glory, full of grace and truth. Now, truth in that context is not truth as opposed to lies. It's trustworthiness, reliability, faithfulness. What did people see in Jesus? They saw a man who was utterly faithful to the promises of God. Jesus is 100% reliable. Every promise he makes, he keeps. Every claim he announces, he delivers on. Right down to the events of that Passover meal when he kind of sweeps the lamb out the road and he says, look, I am the Passover lamb. I am here to pour my life out for you and bring about your freedom. And we want others to join us. Not so they can see that this is a kind of welcoming community and people are really quite nice and you can manage an hour on a Sunday, it's not too boring. But we want people to see that God is faithful. And I guess people are going to get a glimpse of how faithful our God is when they get a glimpse that we are faithful in marriage, we're faithful in friendship, we're faithful in disagreements with each other. We don't walk away. We don't give up. We persevere in faithfulness to each other. Because that's who our God is. And when people start to see that in our lives, they might start to believe that our God is faithful too. Okay, I've got one last thing, very short thing to say. We're finished with this. Okay, here's the final thing. They're on their way to trust God's strategy. Israel are a nation of slaves. They've been on the receiving end of Egyptian oppression. Their lives have been perpetual work. Their resources were small. They've got 2 leaders who are over 80. That's ancient. Yeah? This is not a formidable group of people. Come on. Slaves, no weapons, kind of ragtag group. But notice how God addresses them in verse 41 and verse 51. Do you see what he says? See what he calls them? He calls them his divisions. Wow. And they leave Egypt. And the phrase that's used, did you notice as we read it? They plundered the Egyptians. Wow. Oh. So this little nation of slaves is described in these military terms. Now, I don't suppose they felt like an army. But ultimately, God would take this little nation and he would use them to defeat enemies much greater than themselves. It's very easy, isn't it, to kind of reflect on ourselves and go, oh, we haven't got much in the way of resources. Not great. Just a wee church. Not got much to offer. We need to adopt God's strategy. He takes the weak things of this world to shame the strong, so that no one will boast before him. Do you believe that? It's God's strategy. He takes the weak things to shame the strong. And he will take this apparently weak little church and through them establish his kingdom wherever he wants it. That's what you and I are called to sign up for. That's what we have left. The slavery of sin that says, do you know what, you just have to give way to this stuff. No. We've left the slavery of sin to serve God, to operate by his timetable, to welcome others, and to be a formidable army. May God help us to do that.